Masterminds have been around for a long time, right? But unless you had a bunch of extra income to throw at it, you couldn't be a part of it. Well, we wanted to solve that problem. And so we're bringing masterminds to you for free. Welcome to Mastermind for the Masses. Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Mastermind for the Masses. I've got Colby and Shan here, ready to rock and roll, back in full host capacity for all three of us. No more deep dives. This week, I'll tell you what I've been up to is I did make that hot sauce that I talked to you guys about. Um, I've got some things I need to tweak on it probably. I think they came out all right. They taste very medium to mild to me, which probably means that they could be hot. I have a very high tolerance in my palate for that, so I've been meaning to bring them in and get some feedback, but in the mornings for some reason I've been forgetting, so I haven't really gotten to test them against customers yet, or friends and family, whatever. But just to see what the flavor profile's like. But that's what I've been up to this last week, trying to just keep hobbies and interests going to see personal growth in that aspect. What
Nice.
about you guys?
Not much in my world. Done with the hockey season, so we got playoffs this coming week. I don't play this week, but then the next week we start playoffs. Yep, still learning to program on the side. That's been going really good, been really fun. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah,
What about
no,
you,
it hasn't
Shane?
hasn't been much different for me. This week I'm focused on packing. Got about a week left until it's time to move, so I'm just trying to get everything in order for that. And other than that, just the typical regular stuff.
You feeling in a good spot about that? All,
No,
all packed up? No. All
no,
right.
by all packed. I have like my kids' room mostly packed, and then my hallway and guest bathroom. That's about it. Which is
Mhm.
like maybe like it sounds like a lot, but that's like 12% of my
Yeah,
belongings.
it's so brutal, man, to pack. I hate it so much.
Listen,
Right.
man, give me a shout if you need a hand. I'm close enough. I could get over there and give you a hand if you need it.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So this week wanted to try something a little bit different, right? Topic wise. So I embracing this whole AI excitement. I decided to go out to ChatGPT and ask it, hey, if you were listening to our podcast, what would you like to hear? And so it actually gave us a response here, and it basically said um, that it's curious about developing mental resilience. Specifically, it wanted to know about some effective strategies for overcoming challenges and building inner strength. I think that's very in line with what we talk about on this podcast and kind of that high performance and growth mindset. So you know, kick it over to you guys to kick things off. Colby, what are you thinking about initially? Mental resilience and how do you overcome those challenges and lean on that inner strength for yourself?
Yeah, it's funny because I was actually talking about this with my fiance recently, and the sort of conclusion that I came to personally, because I've always been like growing up, I was always kind of a kid who had this insane like drive, like already kind of innately inside me. Like I just always like was like tried really hard at like absolutely everything I did. Um, but I think part of what it is just that you have to do it, you have to like go all out and go all in at least once, regardless of the outcome too. That's the key part. Um, and I think that's important because until you actually experience it and know how it feels and know what you're capable of, like absolutely pushing yourself to the limit, you will never know that part about yourself. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people go through their lives never really pushing themselves to their absolute limit because the moment it gets uncomfortable, they stop doing it, right? And there's a myriad of excuses or reasonable reasons as to why you may stop doing that, right? And it may sound perfectly logical and maybe it makes a lot of sense for your life, but I think a lot of the times it's just because people are very uncomfortable with being uncomfortable and they just stop the moment it gets pretty hard. um and I say this just because, like, even I was just talking to my fiance, she kind of felt that way, about herself, that she feels like in her life, like she's been through tough times, don't get me wrong, but like she's never like really pushed herself to her like absolute limit in like a skill or an endeavor and like really like push through like that sort of thing. And So because like for her, like, you know, her hobbies, her work life, it's not like a competitive pursuit. It's not, um, you know, you don't really need, like, when it's kind of more casual, you're just in it for the fun of it and enjoyment of it. You tend not to like like once it starts to become unfun to any degree, right? You kind of just ignore that part or you stop doing it, right? Um, which, like I said, I think it's fine. And I think it just depends on what you want out of life. But I think if you're not liking a part about yourself that feels like you're not pushing yourself hard enough, at some point you just have to embrace the suck. I think that's something that David Goggins says a lot. But it's very true. Like, so many things that I've done in my life just absolutely sucked while I was doing it. And the enjoyment and the fulfillment that I got from it didn't happen until after I was done and after like I grew throughout the process. And yeah, I don't know. I'm curious, like your guys' take on that, because personally, I just don't think I think that people that struggle with this just think that it can't, like, the people that are going through it, it just does, it's not as hard for them, or they're able, it doesn't feel as bad, or it's not as painful, it's not as much of a struggle, so they think they're just anomalies, whereas I think that's just the normal, and the people that push through it are just accepting reality and going about it anyways.
Yeah. No, I think personally, I can tell you, I definitely have to rely on mental resilience a good amount of the time. I live outside of my comfort zone as much as possible. I mean, don't get me wrong, I enjoy being inside of it, but just naturally, I think like I'm wired to just kind of look for things like that. But for me, I think the key to mental resilience and actually being able to continue to dig deep and find the strength to carry on, I have to take, I guess to do it healthy, I have to take my ego out of it too. Because I always have to reflect and ask myself why I need to be resilient in this moment. Because if it's purely ego driven, I might force myself to do something that's adding no value for me, but it just, whatever, checks some kind of box, or I need to prove myself that I did this thing or whatever. And that makes it an unenjoyable experience as I dig into that resilience. Whereas if I can take a more objective view and step back and say, hey, this is difficult right now, but in 1 year or 6 months or 10 years, this is going to pay off and get me to my end objective. That then helps me have that motivation to reinforce what I'm doing and allows me to find the ability to dig deep out of desire rather than out of pure stubbornness or like to feed my ego, if that makes sense. That's kind of how I look at it and decide how and when to use it, because also it's just like exercising a muscle. If all you're ever doing is using mental resilience, like, and you don't have any other kind of intrinsic force motivating you, I think it becomes very easy to burn out. And then it makes you not want to do that the next time that it would actually be beneficial for you to do so. At least those are my initial thoughts on how I would approach it. But Shan, I'm curious, you know, how do you take a look? Because, Colby was talking about kind of a little bit of the competitive side of it. I'm talking more of looking at it from an internal or objective perspective. Like, what are your strategies to approaching mental resilience?
No, I think you guys kind of nailed it and covered pretty much exactly what I would have said. Because to me, like thinking about building mental resilience, you know, to me, it's all about like tackling the fear of adversity. And I was actually just going through this the other day. So I've been doing jiu-jitsu now, for anyone who's been listening for a while, for about 6 months. And for the first time, I actually texted the guy who got me into it, and I messaged him, and I'm like, hey man, like, just so you know, I kind of hated this, like all the way up until now. And last night, that was one of the most fun I've had in jujitsu. Like I enjoyed it the whole time. My conditioning starting to peak out, and I'm having fun doing it instead of just kind of getting my ass kicked for the last like 5 months. And I think that's kind of the case for everything. Uh, and that's how I approach like tackling that like mental resilience. And the best other example I can give is I hate roller coasters like with a burning passion. never enjoy them. I really don't understand like the enjoyment out of like almost killing yourself or making it seem like you might kill yourself. But I go on them no matter what. Like if I'm with the group, I won't let fear win and cause me to not actually ride, even though I know I'm going to hate it. My adrenaline's going to spike. I'll get a headache, whatever. I often put myself in that position because I know really there's no such thing as building mental resilience or tackling fear if you just don't do it. And it kind of like it leads my decision in everything I do. I mean, this podcast, right? Like I'm not a great public speaker. Starting a podcast never ever occurred to me in my mind ever. It wasn't something that I dreamed of or anything, but just knowing that there's these excuses, and that's where your point, Josh, about ego is important. If you put your ego aside, it kind of allows you to not come up with these legitimate excuses for doing something, right? Like if you have a strong ego going into something, oh, we don't have 1,000 subscribers yet, we should just give up. That's what an ego, if you don't put it aside, that's where it would get you. So I kind of bouncing off of both of your points really resonates with me. And again, that's how I operate on a day-to-day. Like it's not about being driven to me. It's not about being motivated. It's just simply about like backing down when things get scary.
Yeah, and to kind of echo off that too, Shan, one thing I think that leads people to not either like have a high degree of mental resilience or just their ability to push through things is this idea that just because you put in a lot of effort, you should always get your number one reward or your number one goal like every single time. And here's what I mean by this, like, right, like, so if you play, just say for example, a sport, and you put a lot of effort into being really good at that sport, and you give it like 110% for like an entire year or season, whatever, and then you and your team still end up losing, like you don't get first place, right? And a lot of people would say like, well, it's like, why even play if you couldn't win, right? Like if your goal was winning, all you were focused on was winning, and you didn't win, like why continue to do it, right? And I think especially this is more, maybe it's a better example is like in real life when if you are trying to lose weight, you have a weight goal in mind, you do all this work and you still don't achieve it. Like say you get 20 or 30% of your goal reached, but you don't hit the timeline, right? And you're like, man, I just put in all this effort. I feel like I should have gotten what I wanted out of this. Like what gives? Like why should I continue doing this, right? And like personally, I think that is probably the most toxic mindset you could have about anything in your life. And because it assumes that this might sound weird, but it assumes that you deserve it. Like how do you know that you deserve what you wanted, right? I think that's such a interesting like thing to think about. Like it actually assumes a lot of entitlement and a lot of that the world and how it works, and therefore you can map out an exact plan and have it work 100% of the time. Like that's fairly arrogant in my opinion to think, because there's so many external factors, so many things can happen. Like you're limited in your realm of experience. Like you gotta be a little bit humble, right? Like you could have missed some variables on your weight loss journey, right? You could be having some misconceptions about something, right? Like there's so many things that could have happened that would lead to the result. And so there's like that piece of it where I just think people aren't being humble enough. But then I also think too, they're not being grateful enough, right? The pursuing a goal or pursuing a dream or something isn't just about the end goal, right? Like it sounds cliche, but it's about everything in between. It's the feeling of progressing towards something and how fulfilling that can feel. And the fact that even if you don't get your number one goal, you still may get 50% there, and that's still 50% more than where you started, right?
Yeah.
And I just think that if you're not happy with that or content, and when you're content with this sort of thing, it doesn't mean that like you're giving up, but it means that you're at least taking a portion of yourself and just reminding yourself to be grateful for what you did achieve, right? And being a little bit more kind to yourself about stuff. And so I think I think that is a limiting factor that people have, where they're scared to put everything in because then they have to face the reality of what they actually get. right? People are very scared to face reality. And that's like one of those things where it's like, man, if you put 100% into something and you don't get exactly what you want, there's so many things you have to face, like in regards to that reality, that I think a lot of people just don't, right? And they make a lot of excuses, et cetera, right? And yeah, I just think those are like a couple like really key important factors. It's just like you do need to be humble, and you need to be grateful for what you are actually able to accomplish. And then I think once you really internalize that and you experience it, it's a lot easier to try and continue to push forward, right? Because you're not thinking to yourself, oh, well, I might not get it, therefore I should give up because it's hard right now. I'm not strong enough to keep pushing forward. And even if I was strong enough, there's no guarantee that I'll get it. So why try? Right. And they just stop. And so
And
I think that is like a limiting thing.
yeah, and you're so right about all those external factors that are beyond your control too. That some you know of, some you probably don't. Things that are going on behind the scenes, and you know, I think one of the things that also helps keep that resilience growing and up is being able to look back. I mean, I can count numerous times when the thing I wanted would not have been the best thing for me, right? And you don't really, unfortunately, you can't see that until after you're past it, and usually a ways past it. That's why they say hindsight's 2020. But I agree with you, Colby, that that content piece is key, not only to mental resilience and such, but just to having an enjoyable life, right? I like to say be content but not complacent, so that you continue to have goals and aspirations and push yourself, but you're not dissatisfied by where you are, because most of the time when you wind up where you want your goal, let's say you did put in 100% effort and got exactly what you wanted, you're still usually not completely satisfied. There's always something that's the next goal or the next target. It's just how we're wired, for the most part. There's a natural tendency to kind of look for what's not there rather than appreciate what is. So I think that's a great perspective that you put on it. And I want to touch on, something that Shan said too in regards to fear, because I think fear does stop us a lot of times from taking that risk. But I'll tell you, the best cure to fear that I know of is action. I think fear builds as you dwell on it, and that's why they have terms like analysis paralysis, right? And things that you get so stuck in your mind about, well, what about this? And I don't want to be embarrassed, or this could result in me not winning the award, or you know, but if you just stop all of that and take action. I'm actually reading a book right now that kind of talks about this, and it's literally the way he refers to it is now, not how. So his point is start the thing that you want to do and then figure it out as you're going. That's a very effective method, and especially when you're talking about some kind of endeavor that you're pursuing that's really not life or death. There are some times where it's probably super appropriate to make sure you have all of the planning and things in place, but all of the planning you do in the world to try to achieve something, guarantee one of those external factors we were just talking about is going to pop up, and your plan's going to have to shift and change. And that's when that mental resilience is really going to become key, right? And I'm just imagining, Shannon, if you are open to sharing, right? And you've talked about this a little bit, but I'm sure mental resilience has played a major factor while you were building the beer brand, and now that you're or beard brand, and now that you're working on building, the clothing brand. All of that has to play a factor with mental resilience, because there's tons of external things that come into play there.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, for sure. When we built the beard brand to what we built it to, we had a crazy happening. So we used to work with, so long story short, we used to work with a co-packer that would basically take our like formulated ingredients, whatever we'd come up with, and they'd produce it, in a large facility, where things are like tightly controlled, and quality is checked for, and so on and so forth. And we worked with them pretty tightly at the beginning of everything, but then we started to have these issues come out, and it really kind of sparked. We had a video about us go viral on YouTube, and spiked demand for the brand, and we dealt with a lot of like delays and and issues getting our orders out. We had to cancel, hundreds and hundreds of orders because just being unsatisfied with like the delay of getting supplies in and the products formulated and everything, and a lot of that out of our control. And at the time, man, that was like literally hoping for your big shot, hitting it, and then just being like everything getting in your way and causing you to really not be able to capitalize off of it. So we lost thousands of dollars because of that situation. And of course we delayed the scaling of the whole entire company. But facing through that adversity, it did take a lot of like mental resilience. We had to change everything. We brought everything back in house. We readjusted how the actual like formulated ingredients were packaged so they'd be quicker, and brought labels back in house so we can handle like a lot of that stuff. And kind of like, unfortunately, we learned a lot from that experience, but we could have easily quit, and we almost did easily quit. But again, like, you kind of just got to be in the point in time where you got to look past fear and put your ego aside. You can whine and kind of like bitch about like how much money you could have made and how great this opportunity could have been, but really that doesn't get you anywhere. And that, of course, that driven ego just kind of gets you one step closer to shutting down. So definitely face that quite a few times. And the same thing with the clothing brand too. The clothing brand has been quite an emotional roller coaster for kind of trying to figure out, how to form the brand and what the brand actually represents, because clothing isn't like beard care products, like it's not just a quality product, it's a lifestyle. So that's been a challenge itself too. And there's times all the time where I think about just, well, what if I did, close it down, quit, and kind of give up. But at the end of the day, like, because that comes through my mind as an emotional fear, I won't do it. Like, if it ever comes like logical to the point where like, okay, I want to do this, but I have to make this sacrifice, and maybe I will close down this brand or sell this brand, that's a different story. But for it to be more like things are getting overwhelming and I don't know what to do, I should just quit, that's not going to happen. Because in reality, like, the whole roller coaster scenario, the whole jiu-jitsu scenario, like, I know what the outcome is if I just keep pushing. And unfortunately, that's kind of something you have to live with for the rest of your life if you do decide to quit when things emotionally get fearful. And I think, to the point of this entire podcast episode about building that mental resilience, I think it's easier than you would imagine. It's really just kind of recognizing when things get really scary, don't just give up. And I know it sounds easier. It's easier said than done, but if you can handle that in like micro scenarios, like a roller coaster, or like, I don't know, public speaking, stuff like that, it's pretty astonishing how fast it kind of correlates to everything else you do in life.
Man, you just hit something that I think, I'm gonna take us down a little bit of a rabbit hole, because I like where you took us. So obviously ChatGPT posed this question around mental resilience, but you just talked about a very important distinction that I think we should also touch on, which is the emotional resilience that it takes to carry on. Because you did reference, the fact that when you can get it down to logic, mental resilience makes sense. When you're operating off the mind, you can evaluate and you can make those judgment calls. But you're right. I think a lot of times what is the combatant maybe to some of that mental resilience might be emotional resilience, in that response that comes up right off the bat, right? And someone gives you some constructive feedback, maybe you instantly get defensive, possibly, right? Or you have an experience like you had, Shannon, and you're like, oh my gosh, what? The stress, I'm sure that was there involved, driving those emotions. I'm curious, Colby, how do you feel emotional resilience plays into mental resilience? Are they separate? Are they dependent on each other? Or am I just crazy
So,
and trying to add an extra term in here?
well, I definitely think, because I was making a note about that when Shan brought it up, because I do think that's really the crux of the issue. And I do think it's actually like your emotional resilience and mental resilience are pretty much one and the same, I'm going to say. Mainly because, like, to me, emotional resilience is you can feel emotions, you can be scared, you can be afraid, and you can still do something that you want to do anyways, or at least you at least decide to act even if you are scared. Because like, I mean, that's really courage, right? Like if you're afraid and you do something anyway, that's courage, right? That's what that means. Courage is if you're not afraid of something and you do it, that's not courageous. That's just you doing it. And when you're talking about mental resilience is given all these barriers, you proceed anyways. And a lot of the times the biggest barriers are emotional. Like it's that little voice in the back of your head keep telling you that you can't do it, or that this is too scary, like you should turn back, like this is not comfortable, right? It's always that little voice just telling you to turn back, to stop what you're doing, etc., right? And the more you say no to that voice, over like it's a incremental thing where over time it becomes easier and easier and easier to say no. But the more you give in, the easier it is to continually give in. Like it's like a muscle that you're exercising. And so I really like that from what Shan was talking about, because he said that with roller coasters, right? Like that is one of those things where people would just say, well, why would I do something I don't want to do, right? Like, why, if this is purely for fun, this isn't a skill per se. Like riding roller coasters isn't a skill. You just hop on, they strap you in, and you just do it, right? um but he does it anyways out of a principle where he doesn't want to let his emotions and his fear get the best of him and prevent him from doing something, right? And a lot of people would just say like, nah, that's not for me. Like that isn't like, this isn't a competitive hobby, this isn't like a skill I need to develop. But like to me, that is a skill that he's deciding to develop, and that's a skill of pursuing things regardless of his emotional state. And that the more you can do that in various avenues of your life, and you can increase the rate at which you're forced to make that decision, it's massive. And so yeah, I just thought it was an insanely good point, that I just think like that is the crux of it. And but the problem is that it requires so much self-understanding too, right? Because your mind plays some weird tricks on you when it's like, oh, this is completely logical. Whereas if you told someone it and they were able to really kind of be objective with you, they'd be like, no, you're just afraid, man. Like it's not like you really shouldn't be worried about XYZ. I think you're just scared for this reason, which makes sense, but it is at the end of the day an emotion. This isn't really like if your mind's playing tricks on you, essentially, right? And parsing when your mind is playing tricks versus reality and true logical concern is very hard.
Yeah, I have
So what would
a
you?
quite
Oh,
addiction chasing that dopamine too. I don't know if you guys like just no matter what it is. If I didn't want to do it and I do it, especially at like jiu-jitsu, I'm getting that a lot. Like the days I really don't want to go in and you finish it, like that's such like a heavy like serotonin release or like dopamine release. And if you can like learn to get addicted to that, like obviously it makes riding roller coasters a lot easier. Because like Colby said, I'm not doing it just to do it. I'm kind of constantly chasing that feeling you get when you do it anyway, and you're satisfied with it, and you just you feel like you're floating after you're done. That kind of never gets old, and I don't think anyone can really get tired of that. So that's like another key piece too for anyone who doesn't tackle things that they're afraid of.
Yeah. And I think the more you distance like yourself from that feeling, the harder it is to really get back into it. I really do.
Yeah,
That's why at the beginning I was talking about you just got to do something to that extent, no matter how big or small, because yeah, it's like it's an insanely addictive feeling. And the harder the thing is, the more addicting the feeling is at the end of the pursuit, right? I mean, there's always that problem of like if you're just in it for the goal, you can feel empty like afterwards. There's that whole negative side of it too. But if it's about the process of overcoming and the feeling that you get, like to me it's a bit different. And I think, yeah, like to your point, it's such a strong and powerful feeling that it's just really hard not to chase afterwards.
right.
yeah, I think one of the things we have going for us is a lot of times we pushed ourselves there. But I'm curious, what advice would you guys give to our listeners here if they're on the flip side of the coin, right? So Colby, to your example, right? If they've said no and let fear kind of guide them a lot of times to avoid using that mental resilience. How does someone go from that skill that they've now trained to the opposite side of that, where they are not afraid to still push themselves and utilize that mental resilience?
Yeah, this is really the meat of the issue, I think. Something I was talking about with when I was having this discussion with my fiance as well. And I think the only way is to, if whatever you love doing, whether it's a hobby or a particular skill, I think like there's got to be something you can do to take it to the next level of seriousness. Like you probably, especially if you're the type of person that likes to stay away from, things being like super hard, or it's just you've never been that sort of competitive person, right? Either competitive with others or competitive with yourself to really push to that next level. I think the first thing you need to start with is something that you really love to do, because there's less friction to getting started and you have more of an internal motivation for wanting to stick with it because you can see the goal and you're like, man, that would be cool if I could do that. And before, I just didn't want to push to that level, because the thing is that when you're pushing, it's going to suck. And that's like the second piece of it, is just you have to come to terms with the fact that not everything you're going to do to accomplish a goal feels fun and happy and good, right? Like people see these documentaries or like these stories where it's always like a hero story, right? And it's all nice and neat. But the reality is that like accomplishing something meaningful is not a linear path. It's not incremental progress over time with no setbacks. There are setbacks, like, it's going to be a ridiculously like wonky graph. You might loop back to the beginning a couple times. Like it's going to be all over the place. And there's going to be times where you're going to consider giving up and you have to just say no. And you have to just like push through it. And so that's why I think you need to start with something that you at least have a lot of internal motivation for wanting to do or to achieve. And then you just have to be mindful going in that, yeah, it's still going to suck. Like even if you love this thing, like I love hockey, but like come the third period, which is the last like period of the game for anyone who's not aware, my cardio is absolutely terrible, so it's like midway through the third period, I'm gassed. Like it's not fun getting off the bench and going onto the ice and skating for 1 to 2 minutes just to come back and just be struggling to breathe for another 2 minutes before I go back out and do that for another 10 minutes, right? It's not fun, but there's a lot of other parts to the game that were fun. And at the end of the game, I'm very happy that, you push through it, you help your team win, you achieve your goal, whatever it is, right? And, that's what you did it for. But it doesn't take away from the fact that doing that still sucked. Like it was not a fun experience. And I think that's what people have to come to terms with, is accomplishing things that are hard and meaningful aren't fun to do a lot of the times. Like you don't do it because you want to be happy and fun like during it.
So I think this is one of the areas where our approach probably differs, because I would actually lean more into a rip the band-aid thing. But I guess it depends on who you are and what your approach is. There's not necessarily a one size fit all. But like for example, one of the things I'm reading in that book I was talking about right now, it's called $1 Million Weekend, if anyone's interested. But it was actually talking about going to the grocery store or a restaurant or whatever, and order whatever you're going to get, or check out, and then just say, hey, can I get a discount? Right? No reason why, no coupon, nothing like that. You're most likely going to get rejected in that moment, right? They're going to say, no, we can't do that, or we don't offer that, or whatever the case is, right? And it reminds me of this other book that I read where a guy went around and got 100 no's. He'd walk up to somebody and ask all sorts of random stuff. But what is interesting about it is, yes, you're going to get some no's along the way, probably more no's than you do yeses. But it's going to make those yeses all the more valuable, and it's going to boost that confidence that things can happen that you would expect not to. Plus, on the nose, you're going to see that the worst case scenario is 2 seconds out the door. You're not going to remember the cashier or the person checking you out that said, sorry, we don't give that discount. And they're not going to remember you either. Like, it's the worst thing that happened, right? You paid full price, which you would have done if you didn't ask. Like, there's not really a negative outcome to it. I mean, if you tried to throw like a tantrum and be like, can I talk to the manager? I deserve, then now we're going overboard with the mental resilience side of things. But just putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation expands your area of comfort. And eventually, you start to be okay with these things that you might have thought were impossible at one point in time or scared you, but now because you've experienced them, because a lot of times that's where fear comes from too, is a lack of knowledge, a lack of the unknown. So if you can kind of create more known in your life and know what these outcomes worst case could be, it gives you kind of less fear. So maybe you don't need as much courage to be mentally resilient. At least that's kind of my approach to things. But Shan, you want to split the difference, man? I mean, you got Colby's "do what you love" and me saying "do what you hate." Where do you where do you
No,
fall on
I
those
actually,
things?
it's funny enough because this, of course, would be the case, but I'm like right in the middle. So when you asked the question, like how I immediately thought about it, I was like, okay, imagine I'm someone who's letting fear take through, and my mental resilience because uh, of my issue, like adversity and fear, is very low, right? Like my mental resilience isn't built up. I can't just say like go out and do something you love or hate, because I gotta kind of remember that I'm letting these minor inconveniences, I'm insecure about them, so I'm letting them take control. So I guess like in that specific scenario, where someone really doesn't have kind of the thicker skin for mental resilience because they haven't had the opportunity to build it yet, my best advice for anyone, and I actually went through this with jiu-jitsu, is really find yourself, one, an accountability partner, and then two, find yourself a fear that you hate even more than what you're trying to do, and offset it as kind of like um, offset it as like a negative outcome if you don't do it, right? So here's what I did. I signed up for jiu-jitsu with no prior experience. I've never wrestled before. I'm not that like an aggressive guy. I wasn't in good shape. I had nothing going for me, right? To the point where as soon as I stepped on the mat, my heart was racing because I knew I'm not where I'm supposed to be. But I had an accountability partner that he's the one that got me in there. And, he told me from day one, he's like, I will not let you quit. And he hasn't. And then two, I paid $500 and I paid for a 6-month contract on it. So like, if you know how cheap I am, I would rather die on those mats than waste $500. So like, I kind of branched it out to, put me in the position to where I'd have to really, really either like work hard or be extremely upset with myself, to the point where like, it just really wasn't a possibility at that point in time. Like I just knew there's no way I could quit. I couldn't, because I couldn't throw away money like that. And I had someone who literally I would have to let down every day I didn't show.
Mm-hmm.
So again, like if I'm like stepping back and pretending I don't have mental or emotional resilience and I haven't gone through these things, like that would be the number one thing that would probably get me to start exercising that resilience as quickly as I can. Um, that's just my take. So I would say do something you hate, but make it to where something even worse would be the outcome if you didn't commit, right? So I don't know. I have to figure out what that means, honestly, in your own terms, but that's just how I do it.
I did want to say this just real quick because it really, when you were talking, Chen, it just popped in my brain because you're talking about like if you've never had the opportunity to have emotional resilience and like you want to start building it. My hot take is that like actually everyone has an insane amount of emotional resilience because the emotions happen regardless of what you do.
Right.
If you're, because I've been at a point in my life where I've been very depressed and very down and not acting a lot, right? There was nothing going on, but yet I was feeling all these emotions. But I would still say to myself that I was an extremely strong person at that time emotionally to deal with all that and still keep going, right? But I was still like, in terms of like things you could point to in my life in terms of what I was doing, it wasn't like impressive in its own right, right? But like knowing what I was experiencing mentally, I would still say that I was a very strong person, emotionally speaking. So like that's what I think say to inspire people is that you're already probably a very emotionally resilient person because you have to like experience your emotions regardless of how you act. The difference is just that you have to just act in spite of the emotions like that. And I know that's what we're really talking about, but I just wanted to say that because I think maybe that'll help people like make a connection is just that you're already dealing with your emotions. You're already strong at dealing with your emotions. It's just connecting that piece of just acting anyways, right? And so yeah, just wanted to throw that out there.
I think I want to call something out Shan said too, because I think it's super important, and we kind of glossed over it a little bit, but it's really, really crucial, especially if you are trying to build up that resilience from a place that maybe you have a lower level at this moment. And it's that accountability partner, right? Find your tribe, find people that can support you and encourage you, through that process, especially if it's somebody that that has a high degree of mental resilience, right? If you look at them and you go, wow, they somehow managed to push through even when it's hard, you know, they're just human like everyone else, and they can probably provide you some encouragement or tips and tricks or, ways to improve. I mean, that's really when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, that's what this pod is. It's the three of us sharing ideas and thoughts and experiences to really encourage and help each other through these difficult topics that you can tackle alone, but if you do, it's going to be a slower progress, right? And you could have blind spots, and that's the beauty of having these conversations and sharing this with the world, because at the end of the day, it's only going to make us all stronger and better.
Right.
And what was that?
No, right. I agree.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, it looks to be about that time for final thoughts. So, Shane, you want to kick us off this week with some final thoughts?
Yeah, no, if again, like if I'm trying to build mental resilience, it's going to take, like Colby said, it's an exercise. You're building that muscle to being able to both emotionally and mentally not back down when things get tough, pretty much, in a sense. But of course, like getting there is it's a two-part problem, because yeah, sure, building mental resilience is tough, but you also have to put yourself in a position to where you're kind of facing adversity or facing fear. And I think back to what we just talked about with that accountability partner, and kind of just identifying something that you would love the outcome, but you would hate kind of the beginning, right? Like the getting your feet wet is extremely scary and just something that you've been putting off for a while. See if you, like Josh just said, get you that tribe. See if you can get someone that will be willing to kind of hear you out. Text them, say, I'd like to really get this done. Do you think you can kind of hold me accountable to it, and maybe come up with some kind of system that makes the negative effects to you not committing, even worse than starting whatever you're starting. Like, throw some money at it or pay the guy, right? For me, because I'm cheap, pay the accountability partner. Like it's a win-win for you, because you can either motivate me to get this done, or you can take this $100 and just watch me kind of just fail at that attempt. But yeah, no, that would be something that I would do to kind of build that, build that muscle, is face that adversity as much as I can. And at the end of the day, your willpower is going to grow, and you're going to be a little bit more resilient to quitting or starting something, or just really anything at that point. So like if I were to have to start all over again, I'm 18. I'm very insecure. I don't have any strengths yet. And my mental resilience is kind of at like an all-time low, because I haven't really done anything. That's probably the approach I would take. And it probably was the approach I took, like thinking back at it.
Yeah. What about you, Colby? What you got for us, sir?
I just wanted to elaborate further on something I brought up earlier, where, I was saying that there's a lot of stuff that I do where it's just not fun when I'm like in the moment as I'm doing it. And, I was kind of talking about like, why do it anyways? And I just kind of wanted to further elaborate on that and say it's about pride and principle. It's not, I think people get very wrapped up in thinking that, they need to chase fun, excitement, and what is kind of generally expected to be as happiness, right? Like they want to be happy as high as of a percentage throughout their day as possible. And I actually just think that's like a blatantly bad approach to life, because I think you actually, when you chase happiness, you don't actually get it at all. I think it's a better mental model to think that you're actually chasing like satisfaction and fulfillment over happiness. And that's where I think it's about, pride and principle and sort of getting excited about being the person and becoming the person you want to be and that you always like dreamed of being as a kid and pursuing that, right? And regardless of if you hit the absolute pinnacle of that goal, I can't see how you would be disappointed at all with at least pursuing it. And yeah, so I just wanted to encourage people to maybe think about it a little bit different, right? It's not just about being happy 24/7. It's about doing things that you can be really proud of yourself. And, being proud of yourself is like one of the most awesome feelings that you can have in your life.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think you make a great point, right? Be satisfied where you are and then continue to work for what you want, but always find that satisfaction. For me, final thought that comes up is mental resilience, and we touched on this, is really the ability to continue on in the face of fear or in the face of
You don't need me for the mic rounds meeting today, right?
no.
I talked to him.
Yep.
You guys gonna put something together, a little review, right?
Perfect. Sorry. I'll cut this out. I'm gonna jump back to my part. So for me, it's really about the mental resilience being the ability to overcome fear or overcome that adversity. And when you overcome that fear, I think the easiest way to do that is through action. So don't get caught in thinking about what negative could happen or what are the ramifications. Obviously you want to be intentional about what you do, but intentionally take that action to overcome that fear. Don't let the fear stop you and let you push through your mental resilience. um, so with that being said, right, we're going to encourage you to take that action and definitely like, share this podcast, give us 5-star reviews, do whatever it takes to really get this out there. And let's be honest, you don't want to let ChatGPT show you up with this question. So give us a question. We'll get you on the pod, or we'll at least read the question if you don't want to come on. But we would love to hear from you and continue to support you in your personal growth journeys. And we will see you next time on Mastermind for the Masses.